There are stories that never fade. They linger, quietly haunting the edges of human curiosity. Jack the Ripper's tale is one of them. In the autumn of 1888, the fog-drenched streets of London's East End became a stage for something both terrifying and mysterious. Within a few short months, 5 women were murdered in Whitechapel, their deaths so brutal and calculated that they seemed to belong more to the realm of nightmare than reality. The killer, who came to be known as Jack the Ripper, was never caught. He emerged from the shadows, claimed his victims, and then vanished back into the mist. And yet, despite more than a century of investigation, speculation, and obsession, there's still so much we don't know. Who was Jack the Ripper? Why did he kill? Was he a lone predator driven by madness, or a figure hiding behind respectability? A doctor, a butcher, even a member of the upper class? Every new theory, every rediscovered piece of evidence, feels like a candle flickering in that fog, a momentary glimpse into a mystery that refuses to die. But beyond the killer himself lies something even more haunting: what his crimes revealed about Victorian society, its fears, its hypocrisies, and its fascination with the macabre. The story of Jack the Ripper isn't just about one man's savagery. It's about the shadows that existed and still exist within human nature itself. Tonight, let's walk through those foggy alleys together, not to sensationalize the horror, but to explore what we still don't know, and why this mystery continues to capture the imagination of the world, long after the gas lamps of Whitechapel have gone dark. Section 1. The Murders That Shook an Empire. The story begins in the grim heart of London's East End, a place where poverty and overcrowding were as thick as the fog itself. In the late 19th century, Whitechapel was home to tens of thousands of the city's poorest residents. Streets were narrow, the air was foul, and the nights were often filled with desperate cries. Life here was survival, cold, hungry, and uncertain. But it was also where London's modernity collided with its misery, where the wealth of the empire brushed shoulders with the forgotten. It was in this bleak backdrop that the murders began. On August 31st, 1888, the body of Mary Ann Nichols was found in Bucks Row. Her throat had been savagely cut, her abdomen mutilated. Police initially treated it as just another crime in a violent district, until days later, another woman, Annie Chapman, was found murdered in a similar fashion. Then came Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and finally Mary Jane Kelly, the last and most horrifying of all. In just over 10 weeks, 5 women, all struggling to survive in the desperate margins of society, had been brutally slain. The precision of the cuts suggested some medical knowledge, leading investigators to suspect that the killer might be a surgeon or butcher. But what truly shocked London wasn't only the violence, it was the pattern. The method, the timing, the ritualistic nature of the killings, all of it seemed chillingly deliberate. The newspapers, hungry for headlines, seized the story. They gave the killer his name, Jack the Ripper. The moniker came from a letter sent to the Central News Agency, written in red ink, signed with that now infamous name. Whether the letter was genuine or a cruel hoax remains one of history's enduring questions. But the effect was immediate. Panic spread. For the first time, Britain and the world was gripped by what we now call a media-driven serial killer phenomenon. As the fear deepened, so did the fascination. Reporters described the crimes in sensational detail. People who had never set foot in Whitechapel now followed the killings as if they were reading a serialized novel. The Ripper had become both monster and myth, an invisible figure who seemed to walk through walls and disappear into fog. The police were overwhelmed. Scotland Yard's best detectives, including Inspector Frederick Aberline, led one of the largest manhunts in British history. Hundreds were questioned, suspects came and went, and false confessions poured in. But for all the efforts, no solid evidence ever surfaced. No witness saw the killer's face clearly. No trace was left behind. It was as though London itself was protecting him. The maze of streets, the silence of the night, the anonymity of the slums. What still puzzles historians today is not just who the Ripper was, but how he escaped justice in an era already becoming modern. Photography, forensics, organized police patrols all existed in some form. Yet somehow, this one man remained unseen. It's as if the Ripper was less a person and more a shadow shaped by the darkness of his time. And this leads to the first of many lingering questions. Was Jack the Ripper truly an individual, or an invention of fear, pieced together by a desperate society and a voracious press? Some scholars believe that not all the murders were committed by the same hand. Others suspect that the name Jack the Ripper was a creation of newspapers to sell stories, blending fact and fiction until even truth became uncertain. Whatever the case, those 10 weeks in 1888 changed crime forever. They marked the birth of the modern serial killer myth, a story that combined horror, mystery, and fascination into something both terrifying and strangely magnetic. And though the blood has long faded from the cobblestones, the questions and the fascination have not. For in every whisper about who Jack the Ripper might have been, there's another question lurking behind it. Why does this mystery still matter? Because perhaps, deep down, we're not only looking for him, we're trying to understand the part of humanity that made him possible. Section 2. Theories and Suspects. The Faces Behind the Fog. If there's one thing more haunting than the murders themselves, it's the endless search for the face behind them. Over the decades, Jack the Ripper has been given many names, many lives. Each theory, a different reflection in the fog. Doctors, aristocrats, artists, sailors, and even members of the royal family have all been accused. And with each new possibility, the mystery deepens rather than clears. But let's begin where most investigators do, with the facts that were known at the time. The early suspects. When the murders first shook Whitechapel, police had little to go on. No fingerprints, no photographs, and no forensic science as we know it. Their only evidence came from frightened witnesses and the gruesome similarities between the killings. Among the first serious suspects was Montague John Druitt, a barrister and schoolteacher. He was educated, well-spoken, and, perhaps most importantly, had some medical training. Druitt was found drowned in the River Thames shortly after the final murder in November 1888. The police at the time considered his death suspiciously convenient. Some believed the killings had stopped because the Ripper himself was dead, but no direct evidence tied Druitt to the crimes, only a chilling coincidence. Then came Aaron Kosminski, a Polish Jewish immigrant and barber living in Whitechapel. He was known locally as mentally unstable and was eventually committed to an asylum. Decades later, his name would resurface after modern DNA testing suggested a possible link between him and one of the Ripper's victims, though the science behind that claim remains hotly debated. Another name often whispered is Michael Ostrog, a Russian-born conman and thief with a history of violence. Scotland Yard listed him among their prime suspects, yet, like so many others, his connection never solidified. The Ripper seemed to remain just out of reach, an invisible presence hovering above the names and faces on paper. The Doctor in the Shadows. One of the most enduring theories is that the killer was a man of medicine. The precision of the mutilations, the removal of organs, the calmness under pressure, all of these pointed, in the minds of investigators, to someone who understood anatomy. This led to the infamous suspicion of Dr. Thomas Neil Cream, a Scottish-born physician who was later executed in 1892 for poisoning several women. According to legend, as the noose was placed around his neck, he shouted, "I am Jack the," before the trapdoor fell. Whether that's true or a story invented later by journalists, no one knows, but it cemented his place in Ripper lore forever. Others proposed Dr. Francis Tumblety, an eccentric American quack doctor who had an obsession with female anatomy and kept jars of human organs as curiosities. He was in London at the time of the murders and was arrested for unrelated charges. When released on bail, he fled back to the United States. The British police wanted to question him further, but he never returned. Was he the Ripper? Some believe so, but his style of crime doesn't perfectly match. And yet, the idea of a doctor, cold, brilliant, and deranged, has persisted for over a century. It's the perfect fit for a public terrified by science's rapid rise in the Victorian era, when the human body was being dissected both literally and morally. The artist and the aristocrat. As the investigation dragged on, the public's imagination began to wander. If no ordinary criminal could commit such crimes and vanish so completely, perhaps, they thought, the killer was not ordinary at all. This gave birth to the theory of Walter Sickert, a painter associated with the darker corners of London's artistic world. Decades later, author Patricia Cornwell reignited the theory, even claiming that letters written by Jack the Ripper contained the same paper watermark as Sickert's personal stationery. But most historians reject the claim. Sickert was fascinated by the Ripper, yes, but fascination doesn't make a murderer. Then there's the most sensational theory of all, a one that refuses to die. It claims that the Ripper was part of a royal conspiracy involving Prince Albert Victor, grandson of Queen Victoria, and the royal physician, Sir William Gull. According to this story, the murders were part of a cover-up to silence women who knew of the prince's secret affair. The tale was made famous by films and books, and though historians dismiss it as fantasy, its persistence shows something deeper. People needed an explanation big enough to match the horror. The idea that the Ripper was a prince, a surgeon, or an artist felt more satisfying than the idea that he was a faceless nobody. Because the truth, that a common man could do such evil, was harder to face. The letters that lied. While the murders horrified London, another kind of mystery began to swirl. The letters. Hundreds of notes were sent to police and newspapers, claiming to be from Jack the Ripper himself. The most famous of these, the Dear Boss letter, gave birth to the name that would never fade. In it, the writer mocked the authorities, describing his next job and signing off with, "Yours truly, Jack the Ripper." It was written in red ink, some said blood, and oozed with theatrical confidence. Soon after, the From Hell letter arrived, accompanied by half a preserved kidney, said to belong to one of the victims. Most of these were proven hoaxes. The public, the press, and even rival police officers sent false letters, either to mislead or to gain attention. But the damage was done. The real voice of the killer, if it ever existed, was lost among the noise. And that is one of the greatest unknowns of all. Did Jack the Ripper ever write a word? Or did we, as a society, write him into existence? The man who was never caught. Perhaps the most haunting question is not who Jack the Ripper was, but why he was never caught. London in 1888 had one of the largest police forces in the world, yet they failed. Was it incompetence? Bad luck? Or was the Ripper simply too clever, too ordinary, too invisible to be noticed? Some suggest he was a local man, someone who blended in so well that he could vanish in plain sight. Others think he may have left the country, died, or been locked away before his identity was ever known. Every theory feels plausible until you test it, and then it fades back into mist. That's the strange thing about Jack the Ripper. The more you learn, the less certain you become. Every suspect could be him, and yet none of them fit perfectly. It's as if the Ripper wasn't just one man, but the embodiment of an age of fear, secrecy, and repression. And maybe that's why he has never truly been unmasked. Because what we're chasing isn't a killer anymore. It's an idea. One that's been haunting the human imagination for more than a century. Section 3. Inside the Mind of the Ripper. Psychology of a Phantom. If Section 2 explored the suspects, Section 3 turns inward, into the shadowed corridors of Jack the Ripper's mind. What thoughts, urges, and obsessions could have driven a man to commit such calculated horror? While the Ripper left no diary, no testimony, and no confessions, modern criminal psychology provides some insight into patterns, motivations, and the chilling precision behind his actions. The anatomy of violence. The first clue to the Ripper's psyche is in the brutality itself. Each murder displayed an unusual combination of surgical precision and spontaneous rage. The throat was cut first, often with a clean, efficient motion, followed by deep abdominal mutilations. Organs were sometimes removed or displaced. This level of control suggests more than simple anger. It suggests knowledge, planning, and a remarkable composure in the moment of extreme violence. Psychologists today would likely classify Jack as a sexual sadist, deriving pleasure from dominance, control, and the suffering of his victims. However, the attacks were also opportunistic. Victims were chosen not for their appearance alone, but because they were vulnerable. Women living on the fringes of society. The fact that he never revisited the same victim type indiscriminately hints at a man with a ritualized pattern, rather than random frenzy. The role of fear and power. Power was central to the Ripper's crimes. The late 19th century was a time of extreme social inequality, especially in London's East End. Poverty, overcrowding, and social neglect created a fertile ground for both violence and anonymity. In this environment, the Ripper could exercise power not only over his victims, but over the city itself. Each murder instilled terror in Whitechapel. Newspapers sensationalized the killings, turning him into a public figure long before modern media could propagate such myths. The letters that appeared in his name, some likely hoaxes, some possibly genuine, served to enhance his control over the narrative. By manipulating the public sphere, he extended his influence beyond the immediate physical crime. In psychological terms, this is a hallmark of what modern profilers call predatory control. It's not just about killing, it's about manipulating perception, exerting dominance, and creating a lasting impression on the psyche of society. Rituals and repetition. Another key to understanding Jack is his consistency. While the murders varied slightly, certain elements repeated. The choice of working-class women, the focus on the throat and abdomen, the mutilations, and the apparent calmness after the act. Such patterns indicate a compulsive ritual, one that provided a sense of control or fulfillment beyond the act of murder itself. Some criminologists suggest that Jack's repeated behavior reflects a psychosexual compulsion, combining fascination, rage, and anxiety release. The organs removed may have had symbolic meaning to him, or perhaps the acts themselves were a form of mental reinforcement, a ritual that satisfied his inner urges. The idea of ritual is crucial in profiling serial killers. It distinguishes between a spontaneous act of violence and one driven by internal obsession, a framework that aligns chillingly well with the Ripper's known history. The role of secrecy. Curiously, despite the brutality, Jack the Ripper never left any overt evidence that would identify him. He had to navigate crowded streets, avoid witnesses, and commit multiple crimes without capture. Such skill requires meticulous planning, patience, and a high tolerance for stress. This points toward a man who could compartmentalize, separating violent urges from everyday life. Modern psychologists might describe him as having high-functioning antisocial traits: charm, intelligence, social adaptability, and a lack of empathy. He may have appeared ordinary, even respectable in daily life: a neighbor, a tradesman, a doctor. His anonymity suggests he understood societal patterns, police procedures, and human psychology better than the authorities of the time. Some argue this ability to blend in is what makes the Ripper so haunting. The notion that a monster walked among ordinary people, indistinguishable from neighbors and co-workers, reminds us that evil is often invisible. The myth versus the man. Over the years, Jack the Ripper has evolved into more than a historical figure. He has become a symbol. Authors, filmmakers, and conspiracy theorists have projected countless ideas onto him, from royal conspiracies to occult affiliations. Yet all these projections obscure the simpler, darker truth. The Ripper may have been a man driven by urges and fears familiar to psychology, not fantasy. What distinguishes him from other criminals of his time is the combination of calculation, ritual, and terror. Most killers are caught because of oversight, emotion, or error. Jack managed to evade capture despite immense public attention. This ability reinforces the idea that he was highly intelligent, meticulous, and psychologically complex. A figure both fascinating and horrifying because his mind remains impenetrable. Psychologists studying serial offenders note that the Ripper's crimes exhibit elements of organized versus disorganized typology. He was organized in planning, selection of victims, and execution, but disorganized in emotional release. The mutilations were chaotic, ritualistic, and violent, suggesting deep internal conflict. The coexistence of these traits is rare, and it amplifies the aura of mystery surrounding him. Why we cannot know. Despite modern forensic advances, some things about Jack the Ripper may forever remain unknowable. The precise motives, the unseen thoughts, and the emotional landscape of the killer are lost in the haze of history. All we have are physical evidence, witness accounts, and posthumous speculation. But perhaps the unknowable is part of why the legend endures. The uncertainty invites exploration, imagination, and reflection on the darker side of human nature. Each new theory, whether plausible or far-fetched, reminds us that true evil may not always be obvious. It may lurk behind a face, a handshake, or a quiet life in the East End. The Ripper's mind, then, is a mirror, a place where history, psychology, and human curiosity intersect. By studying him, we confront both the horror and the fascination that come with understanding acts beyond comprehension. And perhaps, in the end, the true lesson of Jack the Ripper is this: that the human mind is capable of both brilliance and darkness, And sometimes, the most enduring mysteries are not the acts themselves, but the minds that commit them. Section 4. Letters, Diaries, and Clues. Following the Paper Trail. While the streets of Whitechapel hold the shadows of Jack the Ripper, the written word became another haunting stage for his presence. Letters sent to police, newspapers, and individuals promised insight into his mind, yet most remain enigmatic, their authenticity debated to this day. This section delves into the strange, eerie, and sometimes chilling world of these documents, revealing how paper became both a tool of terror and a puzzle for history. The letters that shaped the legend. The first letters claiming to be from the Ripper arrived almost immediately after the initial murders. Thousands of correspondences flooded the Metropolitan Police, but only a handful stand out in historical records. Among them, 3 became particularly infamous: the Dear Boss letter, the Saucy Jackie postcard, and the From Hell letter. Each document offered chilling glimpses into what might have been the Ripper's mindset, or in some cases, a copycat's attempt to sow fear. The Dear Boss letter, postmarked September 27, 1888, famously introduced the moniker Jack the Ripper. Its tone was almost flippant, casually describing murder with a macabre playfulness. The writer's language combined the everyday and the grotesque, making the horror feel unnervingly close to normal life. The letter claimed responsibility for future murders, creating a sense of looming threat and establishing a psychological game with authorities and the public. In comparison, the Saucy Jackie postcard, arriving shortly after, echoed similar threats, but in a more taunting, concise style. Though less descriptive, it reinforced the idea of a cunning, playful mind at work, one that enjoyed manipulating fear through words alone. Each document was a performance, merging crime and theater, challenging police to distinguish truth from fiction. Finally, the From Hell letter, sent with half of a human kidney, brought visceral reality to the written threats. This letter, far grimmer than the playful tones of the others, described a murder in explicit, unnerving detail. If genuine, it offers a rare, horrifying glimpse into the Ripper's physical actions and macabre sense of communication. The puzzle of authenticity. One of the most fascinating aspects of the Ripper letters is the uncertainty surrounding them. Most historians agree that many were hoaxes, written by journalists seeking sensational stories or citizens caught in the frenzy of terror. Yet a few, like the From Hell letter, may carry genuine traces of the Ripper's mind. Handwriting analysis, forensic linguistics, and paper examination have been applied to these letters, revealing subtle clues about authorship. For example, the syntax, spelling, and word choices in the Dear Boss letter suggest someone with at least moderate literacy, possibly male, and familiar with the East End. Linguistic patterns indicate a mixture of local dialect with educated forms, suggesting a man who might have straddled 2 worlds, the streets of poverty and the sphere of knowledge. Despite these efforts, certainty remains elusive. The absence of DNA testing at the time and the passage of more than a century leaves us with only probabilities. Yet even in ambiguity, the letters retain their power. As psychological artifacts, they illuminate both public fear and the calculated mind that may have produced them. Diaries and personal accounts. Beyond letters, diaries and memoirs from the period provide additional, sometimes overlooked insight. Residents of Whitechapel recorded daily fears, noting suspicious individuals, strange sightings, and late-night cries. These mundane accounts become extraordinary when read in context, capturing the collective anxiety of a neighborhood under siege. For instance, diary entries reveal that many women avoided the streets after dark, relying on neighbors for protection, while shopkeepers bolted doors early and carried improvised weapons. Police officers recorded routine observations, noting odd interactions and potential witnesses. These personal narratives, while fragmentary, add texture to the historical record. They allow us to imagine the pervasive atmosphere of fear and the way ordinary lives were infiltrated by terror. Interestingly, some accounts mention unidentified men lingering near murder sites, observing crowds, or questioning locals. While inconclusive, these observations echo modern profiling techniques, highlighting potential behavioral patterns of the perpetrator. Each diary entry, therefore, functions not just as a personal reflection, but as a fragment of a complex puzzle, linking behavior, timing, and location in the tapestry of history. Symbolism in the written word. The letters themselves suggest more than communication. They embody a form of ritualized performance. By writing, the Ripper, or someone claiming to be him, extended the act of murder into a psychological space. Words became weapons, shaping fear, manipulating perception, and amplifying terror. Consider the Dear Boss letter's use of humor and casual tone. It transformed the act of murder into a taunting game, where authorities were participants in an invisible contest. The act of sending a letter, observing its effect on recipients, and then continuing to strike with violence shows a mind attuned to both physical and psychological dynamics. Modern criminology recognizes this as an important trait of certain serial offenders, a need for control beyond the immediate act, achieved through manipulation, communication, and performance. The Ripper letters illustrate this principle, showing a man, or men, who understood the power of perception as acutely as he understood the power of the knife. The enduring mystery. Despite the extensive documentation, the letters and diaries of the Ripper era leave us with more questions than answers. We can analyze handwriting, study dialect, and reconstruct historical context. Yet the true identity and intention behind each written piece remain obscured. In this uncertainty, we encounter one of the most compelling aspects of Jack the Ripper: the interplay between history and imagination. The letters are both clues and mirrors, reflecting fear, obsession, and cultural fascination. They show how words can extend the reach of terror, making the unknown tangible while leaving the ultimate mystery intact. Even today, over a century later, these documents provoke curiosity, study, and speculation, illustrating how language and fear intertwine to create legend. By following the paper trail, letters, diaries, and other documents, we glimpse the human dimension of terror. We understand that Jack the Ripper was not only a figure of physical violence, but also of intellectual and psychological calculation, a phantom who used words as adeptly as weapons. The trail is incomplete, yet each fragment reminds us that history is never just events. It is also the record of human response, perception, and memory. Section 5. Following the scenes, mapping the murders. The streets of Whitechapel, London, were more than just winding cobblestones and shadowed alleys. They were the stage of one of history's most chilling series of crimes. Following the murders of Jack the Ripper requires more than looking at victims in isolation. It demands a careful exploration of place, timing, and geography. Mapping the crime scenes not only gives insight into the killer's methods, but also illuminates the environment that shaped both fear and opportunity. Whitechapel, the living context. Whitechapel in 1888 was a maze of narrow lanes, crowded tenements, and dark corners. A dense population of immigrants, laborers, and impoverished families lived in close quarters, where the boundaries between home, street, and workplace blurred. Gas lamps provided dim illumination, shadows stretching long and creating an atmosphere in which anonymity thrived. For a predator like Jack the Ripper, this urban landscape offered concealment, ease of movement, and a steady flow of potential victims. Mapping these streets reveals patterns. The murders of Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly, often referred to as the Canonical Five, all occurred within a compact area, with victims discovered in locations accessible to the killer, and in some cases, offering quick escape routes. These locations, while disparate, suggest familiarity with Whitechapel's geography. The killer could navigate alleys and side streets with confidence, slipping in and out of the shadows, unseen and untraceable. The sequence of violence. Understanding the spatial dynamics requires examining the sequence of murders. Mary Ann Nichols was found in Bucks Row, an isolated lane with little foot traffic in the early hours. Annie Chapman followed, discovered in Hanbury Street, another area offering seclusion. Elizabeth Stride was killed in Dutfield's Yard, Catherine Eddowes in Mitre Square, closer to the center of Whitechapel, but still within the hidden pockets of the city. Mary Jane Kelly, the final canonical victim, was murdered in her own home, suggesting the killer's boldness had grown with each act. Mapping the chronology demonstrates a progression not only in physical proximity, but also in behavioral audacity. The murders began in relatively accessible, yet quiet locations, and culminated in an extremely private, highly risky environment. Such analysis gives insight into the evolving psychology of the offender, each act emboldening him, each successful escape reinforcing the patterns of movement. Access and escape. Escape routes were as crucial as the murder scenes themselves. The narrow, labyrinthine streets allowed quick dispersal, and the dense population created both cover and confusion. Witnesses were present in some cases, but often did not perceive the violence in time, a consequence of both poor lighting and the social conditions of the neighborhood. The Ripper seems to have understood these constraints, exploiting them to remain elusive. Interestingly, certain streets were avoided or crossed repeatedly, suggesting a strategic selection of paths. For example, Mitre Square, where Catherine Eddowes was found, offered multiple exits and was proximate to police stations and bustling marketplaces. The killer's ability to navigate such areas without detection indicates both intimate knowledge of urban flow and possibly pre-planning, hinting at a methodical rather than purely opportunistic approach. Patterns and theories. Modern criminology often examines geographic profiling to understand serial offenders. Applying such methods retrospectively to Jack the Ripper allows theorists to speculate on his base of operations, potential residents, and areas of comfort. Clustering of crime scenes suggests that the offender likely lived or worked within close proximity to Whitechapel, minimizing travel time and reducing the risk of being seen. Some researchers hypothesize that his familiarity with the area could extend to knowledge of residents' habits, who worked nights, which lanes were empty during certain hours, and how people responded to unusual sounds. Such awareness would allow precision in choosing both victims and locations. Each murder reflects not only a personal or psychological motive, but also an intricate understanding of urban geography, witness accounts, and street life. While mapping crime scenes, witness testimonies provide additional context. Residents recalled strange figures lurking in corners, sounds of distress, and people moving quickly through alleys late at night. While often unreliable due to fear and confusion, these accounts help reconstruct the environment in which the Ripper operated. They reveal a community hyper-aware of its vulnerability, with ordinary citizens contributing fragments to the historical puzzle. This interplay between the killer, victims, and witnesses illustrates the social fabric of Whitechapel. Street lamps, crowded markets, and the rhythm of daily life interacted with criminal behavior, creating a dynamic stage where opportunity and peril intersected. Mapping the scenes, therefore, is not merely about coordinates. It is about understanding the living, breathing city as an actor in the unfolding narrative. Modern reconstructions. Today, historians, criminologists, and enthusiasts retrace the streets of Whitechapel to visualize the Ripper's movements. Walks through Bucks Row, Hanbury Street, and Mitre Square highlight how geography shaped both crime and investigation. Digital reconstructions provide further insight, overlaying 19th-century maps with modern city layouts to explore possible sightlines, escape routes, and points of concealment. These reconstructions underscore a striking realization. The murders were not random accidents, but carefully navigated events. The selection of times, locations, and access points suggests premeditation. The killer's ability to exploit the urban environment demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of both human behavior and spatial opportunity, making his elusiveness more comprehensible. The intersection of place and fear. Mapping the crime scenes also illuminates the psychological dimension of fear. Residents knew that danger could emerge anywhere, from the dimly lit lanes to crowded thoroughfares. The combination of intimate knowledge of geography and the unpredictability of urban life heightened anxiety. People altered routines, avoided certain areas, and trusted their instincts to survive. This interplay between space and terror exemplifies how environments can shape both behavior and perception. The streets of Whitechapel were not passive settings. They actively influenced events, guiding the killer and shaping the responses of the living. The spatial context became inseparable from the narrative of Jack the Ripper, blending geography and psychology into a single, haunting story. Conclusion. Mapping the legacy. Mapping the murder scenes of Jack the Ripper does more than chart locations. It reconstructs the lived experience of fear, opportunity, and human response. By examining the physical environment, the sequence of attacks, escape strategies, and social interactions, we gain a deeper understanding of the conditions that allowed such crimes to persist. The spatial analysis also reveals the brilliance of historical investigation and the limits of certainty. We can study maps, revisit streets, and interpret witness accounts, yet the human mind that orchestrated these murders remains elusive. The legacy of Jack the Ripper is thus intertwined with the streets themselves. The cobblestones, alleys, and hidden corners form a map of horror and intrigue that continues to fascinate, terrify, and puzzle historians to this day. Section 6. Victim Profiles. Who were they? Understanding Jack the Ripper's crimes requires more than tracing his movements through the dark streets of Whitechapel. It also demands a careful examination of the lives of his victims. Each of the canonical five, Marianne Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly, had a story that illuminates the social, economic, and personal circumstances of the time. By studying who these women were, we gain insight not only into the human cost of the murders, but also into the societal conditions that rendered them vulnerable. Marianne Nichols, the first canonical victim. Marianne Polly Nichols was found on August 31st, 1888, in Bucks Row, Whitechapel. Born in 1845, Nichols had lived a life marked by hardship, including the early death of her father and a turbulent marriage. Widowed and struggling with poverty, she worked intermittently, often resorting to casual labor or prostitution to survive. Her life reflects the broader struggles of women in Victorian London. Opportunities were scarce, especially for those without family support. Women like Nichols often had to navigate dangerous streets at night, making them tragically susceptible to predation. Nichols' death was brutal, with deep throat slashes and abdominal mutilation, marking the start of the Rippers' notorious campaign and immediately highlighting the vulnerability of those living on society's margins. Annie Chapman, hardship and routine. Annie Chapman was discovered on September 8, 1888, in Hanbury Street. Born in 1841, Chapman faced a lifetime of instability. Widowed young and struggling with alcoholism, she supplemented her meager income through casual work and prostitution. Unlike Nichols, Chapman had a more established presence in Whitechapel, familiar with the routines of the neighborhood, which makes her murder even more chilling. Chapman's story underscores how routine and familiarity with one's environment could not guarantee safety. She was known to frequent familiar streets and even maintained social connections, yet the killer exploited the darkness and isolation of her surroundings. Her death not only demonstrates the killer's brutality, but also reflects the precarious existence of women who had few social protections. Elizabeth Stride, interrupted fate. Elizabeth Stride, often overshadowed in Ripper lore, was found on September 30th, 1888, in Dutfield's Yard. Born in Sweden, she emigrated to London as a young woman, seeking work and stability. Stride had lived a relatively disciplined life compared to her predecessors, supporting herself through occasional labor and small trades. However, poverty pushed her into more dangerous environments at night. Strikingly, Stride's murder differs from the others. Her body was not mutilated in the same manner. Many historians speculate that the killer was interrupted, possibly by a passerby, which may have frustrated his intended escalation of violence. Stride's profile highlights both the dangers inherent in Whitechapel and the Ripper's opportunistic tendencies, exploiting moments of vulnerability with lethal efficiency. Catherine Eddowes, A Life of Turbulence. Catherine Eddowes was murdered on the same night as Stride, September 30th, 1888, but in Mitre Square. Born in 1842, Eddowes had a history of poverty, alcoholism, and transient employment. She had experienced personal loss and instability, factors that left her wandering Whitechapel streets at night. Eddowes' murder was particularly gruesome, with mutilations surpassing those of earlier victims. Her situation exemplifies the intersection of social neglect, addiction, and urban danger. Living at the margins made her a target, and her death underscores the lethal consequences of societal failure to protect its most vulnerable members. Mary Jane Kelly, the final canonical victim. Mary Jane Kelly, found on November 9, 1888, in her room on Miller's Court, represents both the culmination of the Ripper's spree and the stark vulnerability of women in Whitechapel. Born around 1863, Kelly had a tumultuous life marked by poverty and marginalization. Unlike other victims, she had her own lodgings, which paradoxically became her undoing. Her murder was the most horrific. Her body was mutilated extensively, reflecting either the killer's growing confidence or escalating psychological compulsion. Kelly's life story highlights how the Ripper's victims were ordinary women navigating extraordinary danger. Their lives, though diverse in detail, share common threads of marginalization, social invisibility, and exposure to predation. Patterns in victimology. Analyzing the profiles of the canonical five reveals disturbing patterns. All were women living in poverty, often without stable family support. Many relied on prostitution to survive, which placed them in isolated areas at night, accessible to a predator. Addiction, illness, and transient work histories further increased their vulnerability. However, it's important to recognize that these patterns do not imply fault. Instead, they highlight societal failures. Whitechapel's overcrowding, inadequate policing, and social indifference created a perfect environment for exploitation. Jack the Ripper, in this sense, was not only a predator of individual women, but also a product of his environment, one that allowed fear, poverty, and invisibility to converge into tragedy. Societal reflections. The victims' lives illuminate broader Victorian anxieties. Women like Nichols, Chapman, Stride, Eddowes, and Kelly were trapped by gender norms, poverty, and limited opportunities. Their stories speak to the fragility of social safety nets and the consequences of urban neglect. While the Ripper's notoriety focuses on his actions, the lives of these women provide a sobering counter-narrative. Ordinary people navigating extraordinary danger. Understanding the victims humanizes the historical record. They were mothers, daughters, and neighbors, each with dreams, struggles, and personal histories abruptly cut short. By acknowledging their humanity, we confront the social conditions that allowed such horrors and reflect on the interplay between individual vulnerability and societal structure. Modern perspectives on victimology. Today, criminologists and historians emphasize victimology to understand serial offenders. Studying who the victims were, their habits, and their circumstances provides insight into offender behavior. In Jack the Ripper's case, this approach reveals a deliberate selection process, targeting women whose visibility and vulnerability intersected with opportunity. Modern analysis also underscores empathy, recognizing the lived experiences of the victims rather than reducing them to statistics or sensationalized anecdotes. Their lives offer lessons in urban history, gender studies, and social dynamics, enriching our understanding of both the crimes and the environment in which they occurred. Conclusion. Remembering the lives, victim profiles are more than historical footnotes. They are windows into the lived reality of Whitechapel's most marginalized residents. Each woman had a story marked by struggle, resilience, and the ordinary challenges of life in Victorian London. The Ripper's murders robbed them of the chance to continue these stories, yet studying their lives ensures they are remembered. By exploring who they were, we gain not only a deeper understanding of the crimes themselves, but also a broader comprehension of the social conditions that made such crimes possible. Their stories endure as reminders of vulnerability, societal responsibility, and the human cost of history's darkest chapters. Section 7. Theories about Jack the Ripper's identity. For over a century, the true identity of Jack the Ripper has captivated historians, criminologists, and armchair detectives alike. Despite extensive investigations and countless theories, the killer's identity remains one of history's most enduring mysteries. Exploring these theories offers insight not only into the crimes themselves, but also into the social, cultural, and psychological fascination with unsolved crime. The canonical suspects. Over the years, researchers have suggested dozens of potential suspects, ranging from local residents to prominent public figures. One of the earliest and most frequently mentioned suspects was Montague John Druitt, a barrister and teacher who committed suicide shortly after the last canonical murder. Druitt's death, coinciding with the end of the Ripper murders, fueled speculation, but evidence linking him to the crimes is largely circumstantial. No concrete physical proof places him at the scenes, leaving the theory intriguing but ultimately unverified. Another notable suspect is Aaron Kosminski, a Polish immigrant and barber living in Whitechapel. Kosminski suffered from mental illness, and his proximity to the murders made him a viable candidate in the eyes of contemporary police. Some modern analyses, including controversial DNA evidence from preserved letters, have attempted to link Kosminski to the crimes. However, these claims remain disputed, and the scientific validity of century-old DNA evidence is debated, leaving Kosminski as a plausible but unconfirmed suspect. The Royal Conspiracy Theory. Perhaps one of the most sensational theories involves the British royal family. Proponents of this idea suggest that Prince Albert Victor, the grandson of Queen Victoria, was involved in the murders, either directly or indirectly. This theory gained popularity due to the prince's association with Whitechapel and rumors of scandalous behavior. Historians, however, widely dismiss this theory. No contemporary records place him near the crime scenes, and much of the narrative is built on rumor, conjecture, and sensationalist publications. Yet the persistence of this theory reflects a broader cultural fascination with the idea that historical elites may have been implicated in scandalous crimes, feeding the imagination of writers, filmmakers, and conspiracy theorists alike. The artist or surgeon theory. Some theorists argue that the Ripper's precise mutilations indicate a level of anatomical knowledge. Surgeons, butchers, and even artists have been proposed as potential suspects, suggesting that familiarity with human anatomy allowed the killer to execute such precise and gruesome injuries. This theory is supported by the meticulous nature of the mutilations, particularly in victims like Mary Jane Kelly, whose body exhibited extensive post-mortem alterations. However, while the precision suggests knowledge, it does not conclusively indicate professional training. Many criminologists argue that the killer could have been a layperson with practical experience in handling animals, reflecting the intersection between intuition, opportunity, and criminal pathology. The serial killer profile. Modern criminology has approached Jack the Ripper through the lens of behavioral profiling. Analysts consider him one of history's earliest documented serial killers, exhibiting consistent patterns in victim selection, timing, and mutilation. Theories suggest he may have been motivated by deep-seated psychological issues, including misogyny, sexual compulsion, or desire for control. Some profiles propose he had a personal vendetta against prostitutes, possibly stemming from trauma or resentment. Others suggest the killings were ritualistic, perhaps influenced by superstitions or local folklore. Despite the lack of definitive evidence, these profiles attempt to explain the psychological underpinnings of his behavior, offering insight into how the murders reflected both individual pathology and societal pressures. The letters and hoaxes throughout the Ripper investigation. Dozens of letters were sent to the police and media, some claiming to be from the killer. The most famous of these, the Dear Boss letter, coined the moniker Jack the Ripper. Other letters, such as the From Hell letter, included gruesome details and even a small portion of a human kidney. While some of these letters are believed to be hoaxes by journalists or pranksters, others may have originated from the killer himself. The letters fueled public panic and media frenzy, shaping both contemporary and modern perceptions of the crimes. They also contributed to speculation about the Ripper's identity, as handwriting analysis and forensic linguistics have been used in attempts to link the letters to specific suspects. Cultural and social context. The obsession with identifying Jack the Ripper cannot be separated from the social and cultural context of Victorian London. Newspapers sensationalized the murders, often exaggerating details to sell more copies. The public's fascination reflected anxieties about urbanization, poverty, and morality. The mysterious identity of the Ripper allowed society to project fears, prejudices, and conspiracies onto the crimes. Suspects ranged from marginalized immigrants to elite figures, highlighting social tensions and the fascination with deviance. The enduring mystery is not only about the killer, but also about how society processes fear and violence, transforming real events into myth and legend. Why the identity remains unknown. Despite extensive investigation, the killer's identity remains unconfirmed. Factors contributing to this mystery include limited forensic technology. Police in 1888 lacked modern tools like DNA analysis, fingerprinting, and crime scene preservation. Urban chaos. Whitechapel's crowded streets and transient population made tracking suspects exceedingly difficult. Media influence. Sensationalist reporting often obscured facts, creating confusion and false leads. Lack of reliable witness accounts. Few reliable eyewitnesses saw the attacks, and the Ripper operated with cunning precision. The combination of these factors created an environment in which the true identity could evade discovery, leaving an enduring puzzle for historians and enthusiasts. Modern investigations. Today, the Ripper case continues to inspire research using advanced forensic techniques. DNA analysis, facial reconstructions, and geographic profiling have all been applied, yet definitive proof remains elusive. Each new theory generates both excitement and skepticism, reflecting the ongoing tension between historical curiosity and scientific rigor. The fascination with Jack the Ripper also raises ethical questions about the balance between historical investigation and sensationalism. While new findings can illuminate history, they risk distorting the memory of the victims or overemphasizing the mystique of the killer. Responsible scholarship emphasizes the human cost of the crimes while exploring the identity of the perpetrator. Conclusion: the allure of the unknown. The mystery of Jack the Ripper's identity endures because it intertwines psychology, history, and culture. Each theory, from local residents to royalty, surgeons to serial killers, offers a lens into both the killer and Victorian society. The unresolved nature of the case allows imagination to coexist with historical fact, blending reality with speculation. Ultimately, The fascination lies not only in uncovering a single name, but in understanding the social conditions, personal vulnerabilities, and historical context that shaped the events of 1888. The Ripper's identity may never be confirmed, but the enduring exploration of his life, his victims, and the society that produced him continues to captivate and caution. Section 8. The Whitechapel Murders, Mapping the Crime Scenes. Understanding the spatial dynamics of Jack the Ripper's crimes provides critical insight into his methods, psychology, and the environment in which he operated. The Whitechapel district of London in 1888 was a labyrinth of narrow streets, alleys, and overcrowded tenements, creating a backdrop that both facilitated the murders and challenged law enforcement. By mapping the crime scenes and examining their geographical relationships, historians and criminologists can reconstruct the conditions that allowed one of history's most infamous killers to operate undetected. The Whitechapel district in context. Whitechapel was a densely populated, impoverished area of East London, characterized by overcrowded housing, inadequate sanitation, and high levels of crime. The district's chaotic streets and dark corners provided ample opportunities for the Ripper to stalk his victims and vanish without a trace. Victorian London was also teeming with transient populations, immigrants, laborers, and the unemployed, which complicated identification and investigation. This environment created a perfect storm: crowded, dark, and poorly policed streets where a determined and calculating killer could act with relative impunity. The Ripper's choice of Whitechapel as his hunting ground was likely influenced by both convenience and familiarity. Most of the canonical victims were local prostitutes, suggesting he knew the area well. Some criminologists argue that the killer may have lived or worked nearby, allowing him to navigate the district with confidence and avoid suspicion. The familiarity of the environment also permitted him to plan escape routes and identify areas where his attacks would attract minimal attention. Mapping the victims' locations. The canonical 5 victims, Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly, were killed within a relatively compact area of Whitechapel. The murders occurred between August 31st and November 9th, 1888, each within a few miles of one another. This concentration suggests a methodical approach. The killer selected locations that were familiar, secluded, and convenient for escape. Mary Ann Nichols, the first canonical victim, was found in Bucks Row, a narrow, dimly lit street. The seclusion of this location allowed the killer to commit the murder with little risk of interruption. Annie Chapman was discovered near Hanbury Street, again in a quiet back street away from heavily trafficked areas. Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes were murdered on the same night, in 2 locations a short distance apart. Stride's body was found in Dutfield's Yard, a secluded courtyard, while Eddowes was discovered in Mitre Square, a small and enclosed urban space. Mary Jane Kelly, the final canonical victim, was killed in her own lodging in Miller's Court, providing the killer full control over the environment. The compactness of these locations suggests the killer had intimate knowledge of the area. The choice of isolated streets, backyards, and enclosed spaces reduced the risk of detection and allowed him to control the timing and execution of his attacks. Patterns and psychological insights. Mapping the crime scenes also provides insight into the Ripper's psychology. The selection of sites indicates careful planning. He chose areas where he could avoid interruption, suggesting both patience and calculation. Moreover, the spatial distribution shows an understanding of risk and escape routes. The killings were often carried out late at night or in the early hours, when foot traffic was minimal and the darkness provided cover. Some criminologists have used geographic profiling to analyze the murders. This method involves studying the locations of crimes to infer the likely base of operations of the offender. The compact clustering of the Ripper's murders suggests a central residence or workplace near the Whitechapel district. The technique also reveals that the killer likely had a routine or familiarity with local patterns, such as when streets would be empty and when victims would be accessible. Urban infrastructure and the killer's advantage. The physical structure of Whitechapel itself played a significant role in the murders. Narrow alleys, high walls, and the maze-like layout allowed the killer to approach victims stealthily and escape quickly. Poor street lighting meant that even nearby residents often could not see what was happening. The urban environment, combined with the Ripper's apparent knowledge of human behavior and local routines, gave him a tactical advantage. Furthermore, the district's socioeconomic conditions contributed to his ability to operate. Many residents were preoccupied with survival, work, and overcrowded living conditions, making them less likely to notice or intervene in suspicious activity. Prostitutes, the primary targets, were particularly vulnerable due to their social and economic marginalization, which limited their access to protection and support. The role of law enforcement. Despite the best efforts of the Metropolitan Police, the geography of Whitechapel hindered effective policing. Officers faced challenges such as limited manpower, inadequate lighting, and the difficulty of patrolling narrow alleyways. Witness accounts were scarce and often unreliable, as residents were hesitant to speak out due to fear of retribution or mistrust of authorities. The combination of environmental complexity and social conditions allowed the Ripper to evade capture, even as law enforcement implemented door-to-door inquiries and increased patrols. Maps of Whitechapel from the time showed just how labyrinthine the area was. Streets often intersected at awkward angles, courtyards were hidden from view, and many buildings had multiple entrances and exits. This made surveillance and pursuit difficult, further favoring a predator who understood the terrain intimately. Modern analyses and lessons. Today, historians and criminologists continue to study the Whitechapel murders through mapping and spatial analysis. Modern geographic profiling tools allow researchers to reconstruct the likely movement patterns of the killer, offering hypotheses about his residence, escape routes, and hunting strategies. Such analyses also help understand the interplay between urban planning and crime, demonstrating how physical and social environments can shape criminal behavior. Understanding the crime scenes in Whitechapel highlights not only the methodical nature of the killer, but also the vulnerabilities of urban environments. It reminds us that even with extensive historical distance, the combination of geography, social context, and opportunity can reveal patterns that offer insight into human behavior, both criminal and societal. Conclusion: the geography of fear. Mapping the crime scenes of Jack the Ripper transforms abstract accounts of violence into tangible, spatial narratives. Each alleyway, yard, and court represents both opportunity and risk, illustrating the careful calculation behind the killings. By examining Whitechapel through the lens of geography, we gain insight into how the physical environment influenced both the killer's actions and law enforcement's challenges. The enduring fascination with Jack the Ripper is partly due to the way the crimes intersected with place. Whitechapel was not merely a backdrop. It was an active participant in the narrative, shaping both the murders and their memory. Even today, walking the streets of Whitechapel evokes the tension, mystery, and fear that defined one of history's most infamous crime sprees. Section 9. Victims' lives, more than just names. When recounting the story of Jack the Ripper, it is all too easy to focus solely on the gruesome details of the murders, overlooking the human lives that were tragically cut short. Behind each name, Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly, lies a unique story filled with struggle, hope, and humanity. Understanding their lives not only honors their memory, but also provides insight into the social conditions and vulnerabilities that the Ripper exploited. Mary Ann Nichols, A Life of Hardship. Mary Ann Polly Nichols was the first canonical victim, found murdered on August 31, 1888. Born in 1845, Nichols lived a life marked by poverty and personal struggle. Widowed at a young age, she faced the harsh realities of single motherhood, economic hardship, and societal marginalization. Her work as a prostitute in Whitechapel was not a choice made lightly. Rather, it was a means of survival in a society that offered few options to women in her circumstances. Nichols was known to have a quiet and gentle demeanor, traits that were often lost in the sensationalist accounts of her death. She moved through the streets of Whitechapel, interacting with clients and navigating a hostile environment, all while trying to maintain a sense of dignity. Her story is a sobering reminder that the victims of the Ripper were real people, living under real pressures, and that their deaths were not just historical footnotes, but profound tragedies. Annie Chapman, Resilience in Adversity. Annie Chapman, the second canonical victim, was found in Hanbury Street on September 8, 1888. Born in 1841, she experienced significant personal loss, including the death of her husband and the challenges of raising children in poverty. Chapman, like Nichols, turned to prostitution as a means of survival, highlighting the limited opportunities available to women in Victorian England. Chapman's life reflects resilience and resourcefulness. Despite her hardships, she maintained routines and relationships, navigating a world that often offered little compassion. Her story underscores the intersection of personal adversity and social neglect, a combination that made her and many others particularly vulnerable to predation in the streets of Whitechapel. Elizabeth Stride, a brief and tragic story. Elizabeth Stride, murdered on September 30, 1888, had a life characterized by transient stability. Born in Sweden in 1843, she eventually moved to London, seeking work and a fresh start. She had a history of hard labor and lived a life marked by both mobility and instability, often changing residences and occupations. Her work in prostitution, as with the other victims, was less a moral failing and more a survival strategy in an unforgiving urban environment. Stride's murder is notable for its abruptness and lack of mutilation compared to other Ripper victims. This has led historians to speculate that the attack may have been interrupted, perhaps indicating her proximity to public spaces or witnesses. Despite the violent circumstances of her death, Stride's story offers a glimpse into the lives of immigrant women who were trying to navigate the complexities of Victorian London. Catherine Eddowes, The Forgotten Layers. Catherine Kate Eddowes, also murdered on September 30, 1888, represents another layer of Whitechapel's marginalized population. Born in 1842, Eddowes had faced unemployment, poverty, and social stigma. She had multiple marriages, several children, and experienced the loss of family members, illustrating a life fraught with challenges that were common among the working poor of East London. Edo's murder in Mitre Square, close to police patrols, underscores the brazen nature of the Ripper's attacks. Her story reveals the intersection of personal misfortune with systemic neglect. A life shaped by circumstances beyond her control abruptly ended in a violent act that shocked even the hardened residents of Whitechapel. Mary Jane Kelly, Tragedy at Home. Mary Jane Kelly, the final canonical victim, was killed in her own lodging in Miller's Court on November 9, 1888. Kelly's life, though less documented than the others, highlights both vulnerability and resilience. She was known to have worked as a prostitute, often entertaining clients in private rooms rather than on the street. This suggests a degree of agency in controlling her work environment, even amidst societal and economic pressures. Kelly's death was the most gruesome and intimate, reflecting the Ripper's escalation of violence. Yet her life was marked by attempts at stability, friendships, and efforts to create a semblance of home in a precarious world. Her story is a poignant reminder that the victims were not merely statistics. They were women striving for survival, dignity, and a measure of normalcy in harsh conditions. The human dimension, examining the lives of the Ripper's victims, shifts the narrative from abstract fear to personal tragedy. Each woman had aspirations, relationships, and struggles that defined her existence beyond her final moments. They were part of a complex social fabric: neighbors, mothers, daughters, and workers, whose stories were often overlooked in sensationalist accounts of the murders. This humanization is crucial for understanding the broader context of the crimes. The Ripper did not operate in a vacuum. His victims' lives were shaped by poverty, social marginalization, and gendered vulnerability. By exploring these dimensions, historians and readers gain insight into both the conditions that enabled the murders and the personal tragedies that resulted from societal neglect. Legacy and memory. Remembering the victims is not just an exercise in historical empathy. It is an essential component of understanding the Ripper case. Museums, historical societies, and contemporary researchers work to reconstruct their lives through census records, newspaper accounts, and personal testimonies. This meticulous work ensures that the individuals behind the infamous name are not forgotten. The enduring fascination with Jack the Ripper often overshadows the humanity of his victims. By focusing on their stories, we are reminded that history is composed of real people with complex lives, and that the consequences of crime extend far beyond the act itself. Honoring their memory provides balance to the sensational narrative and offers a profound lesson in empathy, context, and social awareness. Conclusion. The lives of the Ripper's victims were shaped by a combination of personal adversity, social marginalization, and economic necessity. Understanding their stories provides a richer, more nuanced perspective on the Whitechapel murders and highlights the interplay between individual vulnerability and environmental factors. These women were more than names in a crime report. They were human beings navigating difficult lives, whose stories deserve recognition and remembrance. By delving into their lives, we confront the human cost of historical violence and gain a deeper appreciation for the complexities of social history. The victims' experiences remind us that every sensational crime story carries with it layers of human suffering, resilience, and the enduring need for remembrance. Section 10. Letters, Witnesses, and Clues. The Ripper's Elusive Trail. One of the most perplexing aspects of the Jack the Ripper case is the sheer abundance of letters, testimonies, and supposed clues, many of which contributed more to myth than to solving the murders. The Whitechapel murders occurred in a densely populated, chaotic environment, and the Ripper left behind no definitive evidence, making the pursuit of the killer a challenge even for seasoned investigators. Yet over time, these letters and witness statements have become a key part of the narrative, shaping how the case is remembered and studied today. The letters that shape the myth. From the start of the Ripper investigation, the police and media received dozens of letters claiming to be from the killer. The most famous of these is the Dear Boss letter, received on September 27, 1888, which signed off with the now infamous pseudonym Jack the Ripper. This letter described future murders in chilling detail and made specific threats, heightening public fear and fueling sensationalist reporting. It was later debated whether the letter was genuinely from the killer or a hoax perpetrated by a journalist or prankster. Regardless, it became the defining artifact of the Ripper mythos, giving the killer a name that has endured for over a century. Another key letter, the Saucy Jackie postcard, arrived shortly after the murder of Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes. The postcard claimed responsibility for the killings and mocked the police for failing to catch him. Modern analysis has suggested that it was likely written by someone seeking attention, rather than the murderer himself. Yet these letters contributed to a growing aura of fear, demonstrating how public perception and media sensationalism can amplify a criminal case beyond its immediate facts. Even more compelling is the From Hell letter, sent to George Lusk, the head of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee. Unlike the other letters, it included a small box containing half a human kidney, allegedly taken from one of the victims. The letter's coarse language, combined with the grisly parcel, blurred the line between reality and myth. While historians still debate its authenticity, the From Hell letter has become emblematic of the mystery surrounding the case, a chilling reminder of the unknown intentions behind the crimes. Witnesses and their accounts. Witnesses were crucial to the investigation, yet their testimonies often conflicted or proved unreliable under scrutiny. The chaotic streets of Whitechapel, poorly lit and crowded, made precise observation nearly impossible. Residents reported seeing shadowy figures or hearing cries, but no account provided a definitive image of the murderer. One notable witness, Israel Schwartz, claimed to have seen a man attacking Elizabeth Stride. He described the assailant as a large man, wearing a dark coat and hat, but his account was limited by fear and the fleeting nature of the encounter. Similarly, a man named Charles Cross reportedly discovered the body of Marianne Nichols and saw someone fleeing nearby. However, descriptions of height, clothing, and behavior often varied between witnesses, creating confusion rather than clarity. The sheer number of people in the area, workers, prostitutes, and residents, meant that multiple sets of eyes were watching at once, yet the killer managed to remain elusive. Witnesses provided context and detail about the victim's final hours, the locations, and the social environment of Whitechapel, but none were able to offer a concrete lead to the identity of Jack the Ripper. Their testimonies, though fragmented, remain valuable historical records of both the murders and the daily life of the district. Clues that led nowhere. Despite meticulous searches and examinations, tangible clues were few. The killer left no fingerprints or DNA evidence that could be used with contemporary forensic methods. Items at the crime scenes, such as discarded clothing or personal effects, often held potential but yielded little investigative value. The police focused on footprints, the orientation of the bodies, and the locations where the victims were found, seeking patterns that might reveal the killer's habits. Some clues, like the mutilation patterns, suggested a certain degree of anatomical knowledge or at least familiarity with dissection. This led to speculation about the Ripper's profession, with candidates ranging from surgeons to butchers. Yet these theories remain conjecture, supported by patterns but never definitively proven. Even items such as the half-kidney sent in the From Hell letter could not be conclusively matched to a known victim, leaving investigators frustrated and the public intrigued. Other supposed clues, like torn scraps of clothing or reports of suspicious behavior, often turned out to be unrelated. In a densely populated and impoverished area like Whitechapel, rumors and coincidences could easily be mistaken for evidence. Every lead needed to be scrutinized, yet the mixture of truth, imagination, and panic made the task nearly impossible. This murky landscape of potential clues contributed to the enduring fascination with the case, as each new discovery promised insight but rarely delivered certainty. The impact of media on clues and witnesses. The press played a significant role in shaping both public perception and the investigation. Newspapers sensationalized the murders, publishing lurid details and emphasizing the mystery of the killer. The media also printed some of the letters, amplifying fear and shaping the narrative of Jack the Ripper as a cunning, almost supernatural figure. Witnesses, aware of the intense media coverage, often provided exaggerated or embellished accounts, consciously or unconsciously influenced by the stories they read. This interplay between media, witnesses, and police reports highlights the complex ecosystem surrounding the investigation. Each element, letters, testimonies, and minor clues, fed into a larger story that was part fact, part myth. The Ripper's ability to remain hidden while dominating public consciousness demonstrates the power of perception, fear, and narrative in the history of crime. Legacy of the elusive trail. The letters, witnesses, and clues of the Ripper case continue to fascinate historians, criminologists, and enthusiasts. They provide insight not only into the crimes themselves, but into Victorian society, policing methods, and the psychological impact of a serial killer on a community. Each letter, whether authentic or a hoax, tells a story about communication, deception, and public anxiety. Each witness account reveals the limitations of human perception under stress. Each potential clue underscores both the ingenuity of the perpetrator and the difficulty of solving crimes without modern forensic tools. The Ripper's trail, though elusive, offers lessons in investigation, critical thinking, and historical interpretation. It reminds us that even in the absence of conclusive evidence, the synthesis of accounts, social context, and careful analysis can illuminate the human experience behind a crime. It is not just about identifying a murderer. It is about understanding the world in which these events unfolded and the interplay between fear, society, and memory. Conclusion. The combination of letters, witnesses, and physical clues created a complex web of information that was both revealing and frustrating. The uncertainty surrounding authenticity, reliability, and interpretation contributed to the legend of Jack the Ripper, transforming a series of local murders into a global historical enigma. These elements reveal not only the cunning of the killer, but the challenges faced by those trying to understand and contain him. By examining the Ripper's elusive trail, we gain a richer understanding of Victorian London, the impact of media sensationalism, and the vulnerabilities of marginalized communities. The letters, witnesses, and clues may never definitively solve the mystery, but they preserve the memory of a city grappling with terror, fear, and fascination, ensuring that the story of Jack the Ripper continues to captivate generations. Section 11. Theories and Suspects. Endless speculation. The Jack the Ripper case has generated more theories and suspects than almost any other crime in history. Over the years, historians, criminologists, and amateur sleuths have proposed hundreds of potential identities for the killer, each theory reflecting not only forensic reasoning but also cultural biases, historical interpretations, and public fascination. Despite more than a century of speculation, no conclusive evidence has ever emerged, leaving the identity of Jack the Ripper one of history's most enduring mysteries. Yet the abundance of suspects offers a fascinating glimpse into the social, political, and psychological landscape of late Victorian London. Early suspects. The immediate circle. During the initial investigation, the police focused on men living and working in Whitechapel who had access to the areas where the murders occurred. One common theory implicated local butchers and slaughterhouse workers, given the precise and gruesome mutilations of some victims. The logic was straightforward. Someone familiar with anatomy, knives, and dissection could carry out the Ripper's attacks. These individuals were often poor and transient, fitting the profile of men who might commit violent crimes under pressure, though no direct evidence linked them to the murders. Another early suspect was Montague John Druitt, a barrister and teacher who committed suicide shortly after the last canonical Ripper murder. His death raised suspicion, with some contemporaries arguing that the timing suggested guilt and a sudden breakdown. Later investigators noted Druitt's social background and mental health history, speculating that he might have harbored violent tendencies. While compelling to some, there was never concrete evidence connecting him to the crimes, illustrating how circumstantial details fueled public intrigue. Theories of high-profile suspects. Beyond local suspects, the Ripper case gave rise to more sensational theories involving high-profile figures. One famous hypothesis suggested that Prince Albert Victor, grandson of Queen Victoria, was implicated in the murders. This theory relied on unverified rumors of secret affairs, illegitimate children, and attempts to cover up royal scandal. Though widely discredited by historians, the idea captured public imagination, reinforcing the notion of a mysterious and untouchable killer. Similarly, some theories focused on prominent physicians or surgeons, positing that the killer's knowledge of anatomy and surgical tools indicated professional training. One candidate, Dr. Francis Tumblety, a flamboyant American quack doctor, was known for misogynistic tendencies and was briefly arrested in connection with the murders. Though he fled England before being formally charged, Tumblety remains a recurring figure in speculative lists of suspects due to his erratic behavior and fascination with female anatomy. Psychological profiling and modern suspects. With the development of modern criminology, psychological profiling has been applied to the Ripper case. Behavioral analysts suggest that the killer exhibited traits of psychopathy, organized planning, and predatory behavior. These profiles indicate someone who could operate in crowded urban environments without drawing attention, carefully selecting victims while managing panic and evasion. Modern suspects are often considered through this lens, balancing historical evidence with psychological likelihood. Some contemporary researchers focus on local men with histories of violence or sexual aggression. Others investigate the possibility of multiple perpetrators or copycat attacks, given inconsistencies in the timeline and differences in mutilation methods. Each theory attempts to reconcile the known facts with behavioral tendencies, yet the lack of physical evidence leaves all conclusions speculative. These approaches, while scientific in method, underscore the enduring difficulty of confirming the Ripper's identity. Cultural and social influences on suspect lists. The endless catalog of suspects reflects more than individual investigation. It also mirrors Victorian society and its anxieties. The murders occurred in a densely populated, impoverished district, where fear of crime, public health concerns, and moral panic shaped perceptions. Many early suspects were poor immigrants or socially marginalized men, highlighting how prejudice and societal bias influenced suspicion. Meanwhile, theories involving royalty or physicians reveal fascination with social hierarchies and the allure of scandal. Public fascination also encouraged creative speculation. Writers, journalists, and amateur historians contributed to a growing mythology around the Ripper, blending fact and fiction. This narrative pressure often obscured evidence and elevated sensational stories above rational deduction. The legacy of these theories illustrates the interplay between crime, media, and collective imagination, a phenomenon that continues to this day. The role of evidence in speculation. Despite numerous suspects, very few were ever strongly linked to the murders through evidence. Contemporary forensic methods were rudimentary, and Victorian policing lacked the technology to confirm identity through fingerprints or DNA. Letters, witness accounts, and circumstantial evidence formed the basis for most accusations, leaving the investigation vulnerable to bias and rumor. Even physical evidence, such as the half-kidney sent in the From Hell letter, could not be conclusively matched to a victim, leaving open multiple interpretations. Modern researchers have revisited the case with contemporary forensic science, using historical records and forensic genealogy to attempt to narrow down suspects. While intriguing, these efforts have yet to yield definitive answers, reinforcing the Ripper's enduring elusiveness. The mystery persists precisely because the evidence is fragmented, unreliable, or lost, a reminder of both the limits of human investigation and the persistent fascination with unsolved crime. Why the suspect list endures. The Ripper's unknown identity has fueled over a century of speculation, making the list of suspects almost as famous as the murders themselves. Each candidate offers a window into the historical moment, the fears, prejudices, and social dynamics of Whitechapel. By examining these figures, we gain insight into Victorian anxieties about urban crime, gender, and class, as well as modern fascination with the dark corners of history. This endless speculation also emphasizes the narrative power of mystery. The lack of resolution transforms historical fact into cultural legend. Each new theory invites debate, analysis, and imagination, demonstrating that the story of Jack the Ripper is not only about murder, but also about society's need to confront the unknown. In this sense, the suspects are more than historical figures. They are symbols of human curiosity, fear, and the desire to understand what is elusive and terrifying. Conclusion. Theories and suspects surrounding Jack the Ripper form a tapestry of history, psychology, and myth. From local butchers to royal figures, from quack doctors to modern psychological profiles, each candidate reveals facets of both the crime and the society in which it occurred. The lack of conclusive evidence allows speculation to flourish, ensuring that the identity of the killer remains a subject of fascination. Ultimately, the Ripper case teaches us about human psychology, social dynamics, and the power of narrative. The suspects, real, imagined, or somewhere in between, offer insight into Victorian London, the evolution of criminology, and the enduring allure of unsolved mysteries. By studying these theories, we not only explore the identity of one of history's most infamous killers, but also examine the human desire to understand, categorize, and confront the unknown. Section 12. Modern Investigations and Forensic Breakthroughs. Over a century after the Whitechapel murders, Jack the Ripper continues to fascinate not only historians and amateur sleuths, but also professional criminologists armed with modern investigative tools. While Victorian detectives relied heavily on witness testimony, rudimentary sketches, and circumstantial evidence, contemporary researchers have access to technologies unimaginable in the 1880s. From DNA analysis to digital archiving and geographic profiling, modern methods have breathed new life into the quest to uncover the Ripper's identity. Yet they have also highlighted just how elusive the truth remains. Revisiting the evidence. One of the first steps in modern investigation has been the meticulous re-examination of historical documents. Police reports, witness statements, letters purportedly from the killer, and newspaper accounts have all been digitized and scrutinized for inconsistencies or overlooked details. Scholars have compared timelines, cross-referenced addresses, and even analyzed the handwriting and linguistic patterns of letters such as the infamous Dear Boss and From Hell letters. These efforts aim to separate genuine communication from hoaxes, an essential task given that dozens of letters claiming to be from the Ripper flooded London during the murders, complicating the original investigation. Historians and forensic linguists analyze these letters for stylistic markers, spelling, punctuation, vocabulary choice, and syntax that might indicate the social class, education level, or even regional origin of the author. Some researchers suggest that differences between letters point to multiple authors or pranksters, while others argue that the killer may have deliberately altered their style to confuse authorities. Although these linguistic techniques cannot provide absolute proof, they offer a fascinating glimpse into the mind of the person or persons behind the letters. DNA analysis and forensic genealogy. Perhaps the most tantalizing modern tool is DNA analysis, which has allowed researchers to test preserved materials thought to belong to the Ripper. One high-profile effort involved testing the half-kidney sent with the From Hell letter, allegedly taken from victim Catherine Eddowes. Scientists extracted DNA traces from the kidney tissue, attempting to match them with known genealogical databases. Some studies claimed promising leads pointing toward distant descendants of potential suspects, including notorious figures like Aaron Kosminski, a Polish barber who was a contemporary suspect in 1888. However, skeptics caution that the evidence is far from conclusive. Contamination over the decades, questionable preservation, and uncertainties about the authenticity of the tissue all compromise results. Yet the very attempt to apply modern science to such an old crime demonstrates how persistent fascination fuels innovation in forensic research. Even inconclusive findings spark public debate and invite new scrutiny, keeping the mystery alive in the 21st century. Geographic and behavioral profiling. Another modern advancement is geographic profiling, which maps the locations of the canonical murders to identify patterns in the killer's movements and possible home base. By analyzing the spatial distribution of the crime scenes, criminologists attempt to predict where the Ripper lived, worked, or frequented. These studies often consider access to transportation, visibility from streets, and escape routes, creating a psychological and logistical portrait of the offender. Behavioral profiling also adds depth to this analysis. Modern profilers examine the sequence and nature of the attacks, interpreting the mutilations, victim selection, and timing to infer personality traits. The Ripper's apparent ability to evade capture in a crowded urban environment, combined with careful victim selection, suggests a methodical, organized mind with a high tolerance for risk. These profiles have been cross-referenced with historical records, offering possible candidate lists that highlight characteristics consistent with the crimes. Digital archiving and public collaboration. Digital technology has further transformed the study of Jack the Ripper. High-resolution scans of police files, newspapers, and archival materials have allowed researchers worldwide to access and analyze information that was once available only in specific libraries or archives. Online databases host interactive maps of the murder sites, timelines, and links between victims, suspects, and historical events, facilitating a collaborative approach to investigation. Citizen historians and amateur detectives now participate in the analysis, contributing insights, hypotheses, and data cross-checking. This democratization of research ensures that the Ripper case continues to evolve, with new ideas emerging constantly. Interestingly, while modern technology offers clarity in some areas, it also amplifies ambiguity, as reinterpretations of old evidence often lead to more theories rather than fewer. Challenges of applying modern forensics. Despite these advances, several challenges remain. Many physical traces have degraded over time, and the original police procedures did not prioritize evidence preservation. Witness accounts are inconsistent, letters may be hoaxes, and the passage of more than 130 years makes definitive conclusions difficult. DNA evidence is often partial or contaminated, and behavioral profiling can only suggest tendencies rather than identify a specific individual. Furthermore, the social context of Victorian London, overcrowding, poverty, and lack of formal forensic science complicates the task of separating fact from folklore. Nonetheless, the application of modern forensic techniques continues to illuminate the Ripper case in unprecedented ways. Even when evidence does not yield a definitive suspect, the process enriches understanding of the crimes, the environment in which they occurred, and the investigative challenges of the period. Every new technological advance offers a chance to reevaluate what we think we know about one of history's most infamous killers. Cultural impact and continuing fascination. The persistent investigation into Jack the Ripper is as much about society as it is about the killer. Modern forensic breakthroughs reflect humanity's enduring fascination with unsolved mysteries and our desire to apply reason to the unknown. The Ripper case has inspired books, documentaries, podcasts, and academic studies, illustrating how a single historical crime can shape cultural imagination across generations. The pursuit of truth, even after more than a century, is a testament to our curiosity and resilience. Forensic science, digital tools, and collaborative research transform old documents and degraded artifacts into a dynamic landscape of inquiry. Jack the Ripper has evolved from a local urban terror into a global case study of criminal psychology, investigative technique, and cultural obsession. Conclusion: modern investigations and forensic breakthroughs offer a compelling lens through which to examine the Ripper case. From DNA testing and forensic genealogy to geographic and behavioral profiling, contemporary methods provide new ways to interpret the evidence. generating hypotheses that blend science, history, and psychology. While no definitive identity has emerged, these approaches have deepened understanding of the crimes, the context in which they occurred, and the enduring fascination they inspire. Ultimately, the intersection of history and modern science demonstrates that even centuries-old mysteries can be revisited with fresh insight. Jack the Ripper remains elusive, yet each new investigation illuminates both the past and the evolving methods we use to confront the unknown. In studying these breakthroughs, we witness the persistence of human curiosity and the enduring allure of one of history's most enigmatic and chilling mysteries. Section 13. The Ripper in Popular Culture, Myth versus Reality. Jack the Ripper is more than a historical criminal. He has become a cultural icon, symbolizing the dark allure of unsolved mysteries and the macabre fascination with human evil. Over the decades, his image has been shaped not only by historical accounts, but by novels, films, television, and even video games. The interplay between myth and reality has created a Ripper persona that often overshadows the historical facts, influencing how generations perceive the events of Whitechapel in 1888. Victorian media and the birth of the myth. The Ripper's transformation into a cultural figure began almost immediately after the murders. Victorian newspapers sensationalized the crimes, using lurid headlines, dramatic language, and speculative reporting to captivate readers. Stories often exaggerated the brutality of the attacks or suggested supernatural elements, such as demonizing the killer as an inhuman fiend lurking in the foggy streets. While these accounts were partly driven by journalistic competition and the public's appetite for sensational news, they also contributed to the mythologizing of Jack the Ripper. Readers were presented not just with facts, but with a narrative that turned a series of tragic murders into a compelling, almost literary saga. As a result, the line between reality and fiction began to blur, setting the stage for centuries of cultural reinterpretation. Literature and the Ripper's enduring allure. Authors quickly capitalized on the intrigue surrounding Jack the Ripper. From early pamphlets and serialized stories in the late 19th century to contemporary novels and true crime accounts, literature has played a central role in perpetuating the legend. Writers often explore the psychology of the killer, the social context of Whitechapel, or the tension between the unknown and the civilized world. Some novels take a historical approach, attempting to reconstruct events with rigorous attention to detail. Others use the Ripper as a symbolic figure representing fear, chaos, or the darker sides of human nature. This dual approach, balancing historical accuracy with imaginative storytelling, has kept public interest alive, transforming the Ripper from a local criminal into an archetype of horror and intrigue. Film, television, and visual representation. The Ripper's image has also been shaped by film and television. From early black and white films to modern cinematic interpretations, visual media have emphasized the atmospheric horror of Victorian London and the eerie anonymity of the killer. Filmmakers often use fog-filled streets, gas lamps, and shadowy alleyways to evoke suspense, drawing viewers into the tense, dangerous environment of the East End. Television documentaries combine archival research with dramatization, presenting historical facts, while also exploring speculation and conspiracy theories. Reality-based series, crime dramas, and docudramas often highlight potential suspects, forensic theories, and contemporary investigative methods, bridging historical fact with modern storytelling. These portrayals influence public perception, sometimes reinforcing myths while illuminating historical context. Jack the Ripper and popular culture tropes. Jack the Ripper has become a recurring figure in popular culture beyond strictly historical accounts. Comics, video games, and even music reference the Ripper, portraying him as a mysterious, almost supernatural antagonist. This widespread adoption reflects both fascination and fear, as the Ripper embodies uncertainty, danger, and the unknown. Interestingly, cultural depictions frequently exaggerate certain traits, such as meticulous planning, cunning intelligence, or monstrous cruelty. While these attributes may align with historical evidence, they are often amplified to serve narrative or entertainment purposes. The distinction between the real killer and the mythic Ripper is therefore critical for understanding both history and cultural impact. Conspiracy theories and speculation. Popular culture also fuels speculation. Numerous theories suggest that Jack the Ripper was a member of the royal family, a doctor, or an artistically inclined intellectual, creating a web of intrigue that blends historical fact with imaginative conjecture. Conspiracy theories often capitalize on gaps in the historical record, such as incomplete police files, lost evidence, or conflicting witness statements. While these theories are generally speculative, they reflect human curiosity and the desire to impose order on uncertainty. The Ripper's enduring mystique is reinforced by the fact that definitive identification has never been achieved, leaving ample room for imagination and reinterpretation. The psychological appeal of the Ripper legend. The fascination with Jack the Ripper is not only about crime or history, but also about psychology. The anonymity of the killer, the randomness of the attacks, and the public's inability to prevent the murders evoke a primal fear that evil can strike without warning. This fear, combined with the unresolved nature of the case, stimulates intrigue, discussion, and endless debate. Psychologists and cultural critics suggest that the Ripper legend satisfies a human need to explore taboo subjects safely. Through literature, film, and other media, people confront the darker aspects of human behavior, morality, and society, all while remaining at a comfortable distance from actual danger. Educational and historical perspectives. Despite the sensationalism, many historians emphasize the importance of separating myth from reality. Academic research focuses on historical context, social conditions in Whitechapel, and the lives of the victims, highlighting that the Ripper story is not just about the killer, but also about the society that allowed such crimes to occur. Public education initiatives and museum exhibits often stress historical accuracy while acknowledging the Ripper's cultural impact, encouraging visitors to think critically about how myths evolve. This dual approach, acknowledging the fascination while grounding it in historical reality, allows for a nuanced understanding of Jack the Ripper. It encourages reflection on both human psychology and the social forces at play, highlighting how historical events are interpreted, reinterpreted, and mythologized over time. Conclusion: Jack the Ripper's presence in popular culture demonstrates the power of myth and the human desire to make sense of the unknown. Through literature, film, television, and digital media, the Ripper has become more than a historical figure. He is an icon of mystery, horror, and fascination. Cultural representations blend fact with speculation, history with imagination, and fear with curiosity, creating a complex legacy that continues to captivate audiences worldwide. While the historical record provides a foundation for understanding the murders, popular culture ensures that Jack the Ripper remains relevant, intriguing, and enigmatic. The interplay between myth and reality underscores the enduring appeal of unsolved mysteries and the ways in which society engages with history, crime, and storytelling. Through this lens, the Ripper is not just a criminal, but a cultural symbol, a testament to humanity's fascination with the dark, the mysterious, and the unresolved. Section 14, Victims Remembered. Giving life to the forgotten. While Jack the Ripper has become a symbol of fear and mystery, the lives of his victims are often overshadowed by the legend of the killer. In the cultural fascination with the Ripper, the women who suffered and died in Whitechapel are frequently reduced to mere statistics or plot devices. Yet understanding the victims' lives, struggles, and humanity is essential to comprehending the broader social, historical, and moral context of the murders. Their stories provide a sobering lens through which to view Victorian London and the conditions that allowed such tragedies to occur. The known victims: Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly. The canonical 5 victims: Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly, represent a cross-section of women living in poverty in East London during 1888. Each had her own unique life, with personal aspirations, family connections, and daily struggles. Yet all were marginalized by society, often forced into prostitution due to financial hardship and social inequity. Understanding their lives helps humanize these women beyond the horror of their deaths, highlighting that they were individuals navigating difficult circumstances, not just anonymous victims in a sensational crime story. Mary Ann Nichols, for instance, had a life marked by domestic instability. Separated from her husband and responsible for her children, she relied on odd jobs and occasional prostitution to survive. Annie Chapman, similarly, experienced hardship and poverty, balancing familial responsibilities while attempting to secure a living in challenging conditions. Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes lived transient lives, moving frequently within London's East End in search of safety and stability. Mary Jane Kelly, the youngest, had aspirations for a better life, but was ultimately trapped in a system that offered little protection for women of her social class. By focusing on these personal stories, historians and writers have sought to shift the narrative from the killer to those who suffered, emphasizing their humanity and resilience. Social context: poverty, inequality, and the East End. Whitechapel in the late 19th century was a densely populated area characterized by poverty, poor sanitation, and overcrowding. Many families lived in cramped tenements, and employment opportunities were limited, especially for women. The Ripper's victims often worked as prostitutes, not because of moral failing, but out of necessity, a reflection of the harsh social and economic conditions they faced. This context is crucial for understanding why the Ripper's crimes were possible. Police and societal authorities often overlooked the plight of the poor, leaving neighborhoods like Whitechapel vulnerable. The victims were targeted not simply because they were women, but because they were marginalized and socially invisible. Recognizing this broader social backdrop helps to contextualize the crimes and highlights systemic failures rather than focusing solely on the mythos of the murderer. Memorializing the victims. Efforts to remember and honor the victims have grown over time. Memorials, plaques, and historical projects aim to restore the women's identities, emphasizing that they were individuals with families, dreams, and struggles. For example, in modern Whitechapel, a memorial plaque lists the canonical 5 victims by name, acknowledging their humanity and marking the historical significance of their lives and deaths. Historical research has also contributed to memorialization. Scholars and authors have reconstructed the lives of these women, providing detailed biographies that reveal their personal histories and the social challenges they faced. This work challenges the cultural tendency to romanticize or sensationalize the Ripper, reminding audiences that the true tragedy lies in the loss of human life, not the enigma of the killer. The role of media and myth in obscuring victim identities. Sensationalized media coverage in the 1880s often reduced the victims to objects of intrigue or tools for narrative tension, perpetuating stereotypes and moral judgments. Headlines and pamphlets frequently focused on the women's supposed moral failings rather than their humanity. These portrayals reinforced social biases and diverted attention away from the broader social issues at play. Modern historians and journalists have worked to counteract this trend, highlighting the importance of framing victims as individuals rather than as accessories to the Ripper's legend. By reconstructing daily routines, family connections, and personal experiences, researchers provide a more balanced and empathetic understanding of the events, emphasizing social history over sensationalized storytelling. Legacy and reflection. Remembering the victims is essential not only for historical accuracy, but also for moral and social reflection. Their lives illuminate the intersection of poverty, gender, and social neglect in Victorian London, highlighting systemic inequalities that persist in various forms today. Educators and museums increasingly incorporate this perspective, encouraging audiences to consider the human cost of societal failures and to approach historical crime narratives with empathy and critical thinking. Moreover, memorializing the victims challenges the cultural fixation on Jack the Ripper himself. By centering the narrative on those who were affected, society can confront uncomfortable truths about social injustice, vulnerability, and the consequences of neglect. It transforms the story from one of morbid fascination to one of reflection, understanding, and compassion. Conclusion. Jack the Ripper's legacy is inseparable from the lives of his victims. While the allure of the unknown killer captivates public imagination, it is the women of Whitechapel who remind us of the human consequences of crime, poverty, and societal neglect. Honoring their lives involves acknowledging their individuality, understanding their circumstances, and resisting the temptation to reduce them to mere plot points in a sensational story. By focusing on the victims, historians, writers, and educators provide a necessary counterbalance to the mythologized narrative of the Ripper. They restore dignity and humanity to those who were silenced by violence, offering a sobering perspective on history that emphasizes empathy, awareness, and reflection. The legacy of Mary Ann Nichols. Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly extends beyond their deaths, serving as a reminder that behind every historical crime lies real human experience, deserving of remembrance and respect. Section 15. Theories and new evidence. Could Jack the Ripper ever be identified? Despite over a century of investigation, Jack the Ripper's true identity remains one of history's most enduring mysteries. The unsolved nature of the case has given rise to endless speculation, scholarly debate, and conspiracy theories, from the meticulously researched to the wildly fantastical. Yet beyond the folklore and sensationalism, modern methods, forensic advances, and historical research provide new ways to approach the case, offering insights into who the Ripper might have been, and perhaps why we may never know for certain. Historical investigations and early suspects. In the immediate aftermath of the murders in 1888, the London Metropolitan Police compiled lists of suspects based on witness statements, victim profiles, and geographic patterns. Contemporary detectives considered dozens of individuals, ranging from local residents with criminal histories to people of high social standing who could move within Whitechapel undetected. Names like Montague John Druitt, a barrister who disappeared shortly after the final canonical murder, and Aaron Kosminski, a Polish immigrant with a documented history of mental illness, dominated early suspicions. The investigative methods of the era were limited. Fingerprinting had not yet become standard practice. Crime scene preservation was minimal, and societal prejudices shaped assumptions. The police faced enormous pressure from both the public and the press, further complicating their ability to conduct impartial investigations. While several suspects were closely monitored, no one was definitively linked to the crimes, leaving the Ripper free to retreat into anonymity and leaving historians to rely on incomplete and often contradictory evidence. Modern forensics and DNA analysis. In recent decades, forensic science has breathed new life into Ripper studies. DNA analysis, previously impossible due to degradation and contamination, has been applied to artifacts preserved from the time, such as letters purportedly sent by the killer. These efforts, however, have produced controversial results. Some studies claim to link DNA traces from a shawl found at a murder scene to a suspect, while others question the authenticity, chain of custody, and possibility of contamination. Modern criminologists also apply geographic profiling, psychological profiling, and pattern analysis to historical records. By mapping the locations of the murders and analyzing timing and methods, they attempt to build a more systematic understanding of the killer's movements and behavior. While these techniques cannot conclusively identify the Ripper, they provide a more structured framework for evaluating the case, moving beyond sensationalist speculation to evidence-based theorizing. Alternative theories and cultural myths. Over the decades, imaginative theories have flourished. Some suggest the Ripper was a member of the British royal family, a physician with specialized knowledge of anatomy, or even a foreign spy. These hypotheses often intertwine with societal anxieties, class tensions, and the Victorian fascination with morality and crime. While lacking concrete evidence, these stories reflect broader cultural concerns and the human desire to impose narrative order on chaos. The proliferation of media, books, and documentaries has further cemented Jack the Ripper as a figure of myth. Movies and television shows blend fact with fiction, sometimes obscuring the historical realities of Whitechapel and the victims' lives. This cultural layering demonstrates the persistent allure of unsolved mysteries, revealing both the limitations of historical knowledge and the public's fascination with crime, secrecy, and hidden identities. The role of historical research. Beyond forensic analysis and popular speculation, Historians examine contextual evidence to build plausible scenarios. Census records, police reports, newspapers, and personal diaries shed light on East London during the late 19th century, revealing demographic patterns, social tensions, and the daily lives of potential suspects and victims. This approach highlights that the Ripper cannot be fully understood without considering the broader societal framework. Poverty, immigration, urban overcrowding, and gendered vulnerability all played critical roles in shaping the events. Historical research also emphasizes critical evaluation of sources. Many letters from the Ripper were likely hoaxes or publicity stunts, complicating efforts to reconstruct the killer's actions. By scrutinizing contemporary documentation and cross-referencing accounts, scholars can separate verifiable facts from rumor and myth, narrowing the field of plausible explanations. Why the mystery endures. The enduring fascination with Jack the Ripper stems partly from the interplay between historical fact and the unknown. Unlike many other serial crimes, these murders occurred in a well-documented period, yet key details remain elusive. The killer's ability to vanish, the absence of a definitive motive, and the human drama surrounding the victims all contribute to a compelling narrative that transcends time. Psychologically, unsolved cases like this captivate because they resist closure. People are drawn to puzzles, patterns, and the thrill of discovering hidden truths. Jack the Ripper's anonymity allows each generation to speculate, analyze, and propose explanations to both understand and interpret, and reinterpret the evidence according to contemporary concerns and methods, making the case perpetually relevant. Lessons from the investigation. While uncovering the Ripper's identity may remain impossible, studying the case offers valuable lessons. It illuminates the importance of social context, policing limitations, and ethical considerations in crime investigation. It also underscores the human cost of neglect and marginalization, as the victim's vulnerability was inseparable from the societal conditions that allowed the crimes to occur. For modern readers and researchers, the case demonstrates the intersection of history, criminology, and culture. It challenges us to think critically about sources, question narratives, and recognize the humanity of those affected. The story of Jack the Ripper is not solely about the killer, but about the people, communities, and structures surrounding the events. Conclusion. Mystery and humanity. Jack the Ripper's identity may never be definitively revealed. Despite advances in forensic science, meticulous historical research, and persistent investigation, uncertainty remains. Yet this very uncertainty encourages reflection on the lives of the victims, on the social structures of Victorian London, and on humanity's fascination with crime and secrecy. By considering the victims, the societal conditions, and the methods of investigation, we gain a more nuanced understanding of this historical mystery. The case reminds us that history is complex, and that the human stories behind sensational events are often the most compelling. Jack the Ripper may remain a shadow in history, but the lessons from Whitechapel endure, inviting both curiosity and compassion as we continue to study one of the world's most infamous unsolved cases.